So today we're going to use an audience engagement tool called Vivox. If you've got your phone with you at the moment and just scan that QR code that's on the screen, it should automatically just jump into today's session. And as we get through the presentation today with various polling questions that we'd like to ask you, the question should just appear on your screen. You can type in the answer on your screen and then it will display to us all live and in real time is the idea. If you don't want to take part, that's absolutely fine. The questions that we've got have no right or wrong answer. They're just to try and get to grips with the breadth of your experience, and so that we can perhaps tailor and adjust what we say to you during the session to reflect the breadth of experience that everybody's got. So have a go, join in. Hopefully it should be fun and informative for all of us. Okay, so moving on then, we may as well pick up and start off with the presentation. So today we're going to look at interview techniques, interview skills. And we'll start right from the very beginning, so the point in time at which you've submitted an application. We'll then look through the shortlisting process, because perhaps if you're new to the interview world, maybe this is your first post, maybe you've got an interview coming up, it's sometimes useful to understand what happens behind the scenes as you get ready for the interview or before you've even shortlisted. Then we will look at the interview process itself. And finally, we'll have a little look at some of the post-interview self-care that it's really important that you give to yourself after you've taken part in an interview, because it doesn't matter how experienced you are, each interview is unique, and we're all always nervous for an interview, so it's an important part. So let's start with a question. Hopefully you should, on your screen any second now, it should pop to life. You'll have 10 seconds, because we like to gamify this. You'll have 10 seconds to answer this question. So how many interviews have you had in your career so far? Okay, so there we go. We can see that we've got a relatively broad spectrum of people joining us today, which is absolutely brilliant. So we've got people who have only had 1 or 2 interviews, so hopefully you'll get something really useful out of this session. Those of you who have had 5 or maybe even more interviews, that's great to hear as well. And maybe towards the end, you can jump in with the questions and discussions to kind of help share that breadth of experience that you've got. So thank you for engaging with that. That's really good to know. So we've got an idea of how many interviews people have had. Next question, were these competence-based interviews? Okay, brilliant. What's superb to see there is that nobody put I don't know. So hopefully everybody does know what a competence-based interview is. And so that should help you get even more out of today's session. So that's brilliant. Well done. And now's the really important one. So what's your success rate? So you might have been for 5 interviews, but how many of those jobs were you actually offered? So whether you took it or not, what was your success rate? Ooh, okay, so we've got a broad spectrum of success rates there. So here, this is possibly where you can get something useful out of today's session in terms of interview hints, tips and tricks to just try and boost that success rate and help you do better in the future. So thanks for that.
Jim,
well,
sorry to jump in. Can I just ask a quick question?
Somebody's
asked what the Vivox code was on the first slide in case they missed it and they want to join in with the questions. So could we either show it again or copy and paste it into the Q&A?
So the Vivox code, I can copy and paste it into the Q&A, yeah.
It's a 9-digit number and I didn't memorise it, sorry.
Okay, so it should have just dropped into the chat window. So anybody that can't access it, if you just look in the chat box, it should be there now.
Thanks, Tim.
I might even be able, I'm going to try something really radical here. No, it won't let me paste the QR code in. Okay, so I'll pick up my thread. And the simple fact of the matter is that once you've submitted an application, then your interview has started, because it's now out of your hands, and potentially the people who are going to employ you are now looking at your application and making decisions about you. So the key here is making sure that your application is as good as it can possibly be. And so what I'm going to do is just go through a couple of hints and tips type slides to just help you do that. Now, once you've submitted your application, the recruitment team will initially do an overall sweep of applications to produce a long list. So the long list of candidates who are potentially suitable for the job are people whose applications have hit all of the criteria in the person's spec. But bear in mind that long lists are often produced by people who are not subject specialists. They don't have any impact on line management of staff. They might not even be biomedical scientists. They might not even be scientists. So it's really important in your application that you make sure that you really spell out how whatever point you're talking about addresses the specifics of the person specification and the job description. Because at this stage, it's a very high level filter that will just remove people who, for example, don't have the right qualifications or don't have the right level of experience. So make sure that you really spell it out. Once the long list has been produced, it will be sent to a shortlisting panel. Now, the shortlisting panel are very often the people who will be conducting the interviews later on. And these are often the subject specialists, and predominantly will include people like your new boss, maybe a lab manager, a training manager, that kind of thing. So these people will sieve through the long list to decide who they want to interview. So the application that you submit needs to have that right balance of broad experience to show that you fit the person specification, but also high level detail so that you can make sure that you're really starting to appeal to the people who you will ultimately be working for when they offer you the job. At this stage, to make the process as objective as possible, shortlisting panels usually rank applicants based on a point scoring system. And so in its simplest, this will be points awarded for each of the points of the person specification that you address in your application. At this stage, they are trying to whittle the pool of candidates down to be the ones that are most likely to be able to do the job. So to shortlist at this stage, you will have been ranked and you will have been given a point score. It's difficult not to take all of this personally because, of course, when you are applying for a new job, it's a job that you really want. It's in a lab that you really want to work in. It's your new job, whatever the investment might be that you've got in this particular post. Remember that from the shortlisting panels side of things, it's totally impersonal. They don't know you. All they've got is your CV. So to be shortlisted for an interview, they like something that they've read on your CV or in your application form. At this stage, they don't yet like you because they don't know you. And so the key now is to make sure in your application that you shortlist so that they get an opportunity to see the real you in an interview. Hard to remember, but try and remember that it's not personal. The other thing that makes it difficult not to see it personally is this idea of ranking. And when you look at what the points are awarded for and how the ranks are designed and kind of split out, again, it can be difficult not to take it personally, because if you think that you're really well experienced at something, but ultimately the panel rank you quite low on that particular skill or attribute, it can be a little bit daunting, but it can also break your confidence a little bit as well, because of course there's a disconnect between what you think about your own skills and attributes and experience and what a shortlisting panel might have thought of them. So try not to take it personally. Try and take it constructively as something that you can use to build and develop your skill set in the future. Of course, we are aiming on these shortlisting panels and at this ranking point to score as highly as possible. So make sure that you give full answers to any questions on an application form to really show what the depth of your experience is, what the breadth of your skill set is. Make sure that you clearly articulate it, and make sure that you really do leave kind of no room for doubt as to what you're able to do and how you're able to do it. So all of this goes on in the background before you even get a letter or an email saying, congratulations, you've been shortlisted, or I'm really sorry to announce that on this occasion you haven't. It'd be really good to know from your own experience what your most common outcome is. So do you often get shortlisted, or do you more often find that on this occasion you weren't successful? Or worse, did you not get a response at all? Okay, so this is really good. This is really good that what this shows is that if you're getting the "we're delighted to confirm you've been shortlisted" outcome, it means that you are on point with the applications that you're submitting. So you're hitting those criteria, you're talking about yourself, you're describing yourself in a way that shortlisting panels resonate with and can see how you will be appropriate for the job. If you're in the group of people that more often get the "we are sorry, but on this occasion we're not going to invite you to interview," it might be worth having a look again at how you address the criteria in the job description and in the person specification when you're completing your application, because it's possible that maybe you're missing a couple of nice easy tricks there that we could use, or that you could use, to help you boost your success rate. So maybe go back, have a look at how you address the person specification, how you address the job description, and make sure that you are hitting all of those points on each of those categories, so that hopefully that will translate into more shortlists and more offers of employment. Okay, so on this occasion, it doesn't matter whether you are more used to getting the interviews or not. On this occasion, thank you for submitting that application. We are delighted to invite you for interview. Yay, we can go forward, we can get ready, we can prep. Well, the fact that you're shortlisted means that the employer is interested. There's something about your skill set that the employer wants. And so what they want to do now is hear a bit more about you, a bit more about your skills and experience. But more importantly than anything, in the interview, the employer is looking to see that you will fit within the existing team, both in terms of your professionalism, in terms of your personality and your style. And they just want to explore more about that. So once you've shortlisted, the employer likes something about you. Your task now is to make them like you over everybody else that's been shortlisted, so that you are offered the job. To do that effectively, you've now got to put in some legwork before the interview. So you've got to try and find out, what is it that has made the employer interested in you? Is it a particular skill that is unique to you? Is it a particular piece of equipment that you're experienced at using, for example? Is it a particular qualification that you've got? Is it a particular skills mix from previous employment? Perhaps you are new to the biomed sphere, having worked in other sectors previously. So Try and find out what it is that has made the employer interested in you, and make it personal. You've now got to make them want you over everybody else. So you need to recognize that whatever your skill set is, it is entirely unique to you. And for that reason, it is absolutely worth selling every little bit about you in an interview. Do some digging, find out who's on the panel. Very often, interview invite letters will tell you who is going to be on the panel. Google them. What are the specialisms? What's the background? How experienced are they? Does anybody in your professional network know these people? Have they worked with them before? That'll help you get to grips with what the panel are like, but it will also help you get to grips with what decision you're going to make if subsequently you are offered the job. So if you are offered the job and you found out actually that the person that's running the panel isn't very good and probably won't get on with you, then maybe that will factor into your decision about whether you accept the job in the end. What's the profile of the trust or the department or the particular lab? Are they a reference centre for something? Is it that attracted you to the job in the first place? So start to think about not only why might the lab or the department want you, but also why would you want to go and work there? It's all very well that you've applied for a job because you want a new job, but there must be something there in the lab that's going to keep you stimulated, keep you engaged, potentially for the rest of your career. So make sure that you look at that as a two-way process. And if you do that, then you will automatically come across in the interview as having a little bit more rapport, a little bit more engagement, and that helps with the making the panel want you. It can often be worth contacting a member of the panel before the interview to have a discussion about the job. Sometimes you might have some particular questions that actually are best being addressed before the interview. So, for example, if you need a job that has particular flexibility around the working arrangements, then getting all the way through the interview to find out that that job can't offer the flexibility that you need might be a waste of everybody's time. So if you've got specific needs, specific points that you think are going to be important to address before the interview, contact one of the panel, establish rapport. If you come into the interview having already met a couple of members of the panel and they've already formed an opinion of you as a person, although they can't use that in an employment decision, they can't use that information alone to influence whether they offer you the job or not, at least you will have had that interaction and they will be aware of you as a person as well as a professional. Then start thinking about where the interview is taking place. Is it on site? Is it online? How are you going to get there? Are you going by public transport? Are you going by car? Dress smartly and turn up on time. From here, you really are on show. And at this point, Tahmina, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, so before the interview takes place, obviously you need to check whether the interview's taking place on site. So during the pandemic, obviously all the interviews took place online. Some organisations are continuing to have those interviews online, and some prefer to have them face-to-face. So make sure you've got the correct details, and if it is on site, think about how you're going to get there. Are you going to travel by public transport? If yes, do you know what train you need to catch, what bus number you need to get, or are you going to be travelling by car, and how long will it take for you to get there? Check the car parking arrangements as well, or you can always get in touch with one of the panel members to ask them for more information. Usually, if you're applying for a job and you go on the Trust's website, you will have some information on how to get there. So do your research beforehand. If your interview is taking place online, make sure you've got a quiet room that you can take the interview in. There's nothing worse than being in an interview and you've got lots of noise around you. It's quite distracting. So try and make sure you've got a quiet room booked out if you're going to be at work at the time, or if you're at home, make sure you're in a quiet area. Jim's already mentioned making sure you dress smart. And a really important thing to make sure you're doing is turn up on time. If you're going to be late, make sure you inform the employer immediately. Don't just turn up late and then apologise, because obviously that gives a bad impression. Make sure you tell them beforehand. Also, the night before, make sure you've got everything that you need, and you know exactly where you're going. If you've completed your portfolio beforehand, so you're a graduate, or you might have made the start on your portfolio if you're still a student and you're applying for a placement, for example. Have you got your portfolio ready to take it with you? I've already mentioned about travelling. Make sure you leave enough time for travelling and for parking. And then also finding out exactly where the location of the interview is taking place, which building is it in, how far is it from where you've parked, etc. You don't want to arrive looking really hot and flustered, so try and arrive at least 10 to 15 minutes early. At least this will give yourself some time to breathe and relax before the interview, because obviously, you know, everyone does get quite nervous before an interview. So if you can allow some time beforehand just to relax. Also, Jim did mention earlier about any needs that you might have, so make sure you do let the employer know beforehand if there is anything that they need to do to help facilitate or accommodate those needs. Make sure you've had a chat with your referee before to make sure they're still happy to provide a reference. And if you're in a job already, obviously think about if you've informed your manager to take some time off to attend the interview, unless of course if you booked annual leave, then that won't apply. So Jim mentioned earlier about the assessment ranking. Now, many of you will be used to marking rubrics when it comes to submitting assessments. So the purpose of the assessment ranking or a marking rubrics is to kind of help us who sit on an interview panel will use this sort of scoring system, sort of like a scoring sheet, and it helps to keep that fair, consistent and efficient decision making. It's clear and understandable, and it provides a benchmark for us to judge the answers to interview questions. So we'll use the following as a guide to score the candidates. Obviously, we'll be looking at your communication skills, whether you're quite clear in what you're trying to get across, whether you're concise. So, you know, when you're communicating an answer, are you actually answering the question, or has it gone off onto a different topic? And that relates to the content of the answer. Are you answering the question that's been asked? Which then leads on to the correlation between the question and answer. So we're looking at whether the question that we've asked you and whether you've answered that specific question. And when you're answering the question, it's really important to show your skills and experience in context with every answer, to try and provide examples for every answer that you provide to a question. So we'll use something called the STAR technique. So the S stands for the situation. So you'll outline a situation. So if you've been given a question to answer, try and use an example to outline as an example to answer the question. So for example, you might have worked in a customer service at a sales centre, and the task might be that you were responsible for answering queries. And maybe you was in a situation with an unhappy customer, for example. So just off the top of my head, I'm just thinking a customer who hadn't received a delivery maybe after waiting a week, and maybe they were talking quite rudely to you on the phone. So what was your action? So outline the specific action that you took. So maybe you let them talk, you listen to them without interrupting, and then outline how you solve the problem. So it might be that you describe the situation by explaining, first apologising about the situation and the inconvenience that it's caused. Explain to them that you'll look into the problem and chase up with management if needed. And then talk about the results. So the customer might have calmed down and you've looked into the situation and you've realised that actually the payment had not been made for that particular item that they've been waiting for. So they've apologised and then they've made the payment over the phone. But then you need to focus on what you learned from that situation, what from the actual outcome. So you could then go on to say that it's important to remain calm and professional, use your communication skills effectively to help the customer feel valued, but then think about it in a healthcare setting, because that's the job that you're wanting to apply for. So the fact that those communication skills can be transferred to a healthcare setting when speaking with team members, speaking with patients directly, for example, or their families. And also, of course, the parcel was delivered after the payment was taken. Thank you, Jim. Okay, now moving on to the more sort of general questions that might be asked in an interview. So think about these things. Why did you apply for this opportunity? So think about what the purpose of you applying for that job is. If you are a student who's applying for a placement, for example, you want this opportunity because you want to gain the lab skills. You want to apply your knowledge from studies to practice. And of course, you want to complete the IBMS registration training portfolio so that you can become eligible for HCPC registration after you've completed your degree. It's important to think about these terms, obviously understand the difference between the IBMS, HCPC registration and the importance of the portfolio. Do a little research about the trust. I've sat on interview panels myself where we've had students and we've asked them, why do you want to work for us? What do you know about the trust? And unfortunately, they've missed that opportunity, researching us and not realizing some of our values and some of the things that we work towards. So it's quite easy if you do a quick Google search for the trust and look at the values, check whether they might be a private or NHS organisation. Some of these things are really important to an employer because we can see that you've done your research beforehand. What do you know about the lab? Think about the common tests performed in the lab. So if you've applied, say, for a job in haematology or a placement in haematology, think about the most common tests in that lab. You'll have full blood counts, you'll have your coag samples that are the most common. If it's a biochemistry lab, you'll be looking at renal function, liver function tests, those kind of things. And then think about your relevant work experience. So have you had any work experience first? And how can you transfer them to a lab setting? So think about your communication. I've just given you an example in the previous slide. Think about your team working, working under pressure, being able to manage deadlines, prioritize workloads. So when it comes to thinking about deadlines, you'll be used to university deadlines. So try and transfer those kind of examples over when you're thinking about answering these questions. Think about your strengths and your weaknesses, and think about 3 words that you might use to describe yourself or that you would want your colleagues to describe you. So these are quite generic questions that might get asked in an interview. So if you've prepared beforehand and you think about these beforehand, then hopefully you'll be able to answer the questions on the day, without having to think too much time on the spot. And then we move on to behavioural type questions. So some of the questions you might get asked are, for you to give an example of when you've worked under pressure and you've had to meet a deadline. So what we're looking for here is, how did you plan this activity? What was the outcome? We're looking at evidence of you assessing your priorities, judging on whether you've had to escalate or whether you've had to involve a team, use of coping mechanisms and any lessons that you've learned through that example. You might get asked to provide an example of when you've had to work with a difficult colleague at work, or maybe a difficult member of the team in group work. So if you're a student, it might be that you've not worked before. So think of an example maybe at university when you've been put into a group and you've had to work together on a poster, for example, or a presentation. So what we're looking for here is problem solving, communication skills and conflict management. You might get asked to describe a situation where you've worked as an effective team member. So here we're looking at your personality. We're looking for evidence of your interpersonal skills, awareness of your impact, and your ability to cooperate and working together as a cooperative team member. And then we can then move on to knowledge type questions. So usually interviews will have various questions on each of these areas. So to test your knowledge, we'll be looking at what do you know the HCPC and the IBMS. What do you know about the portfolio itself? Why is it needed? We might look at what you know about laboratory accreditation, which relates to quality management. What risks to yourself and others do you think are associated with lab work? So here we'll be looking at evidence of your knowledge on protocols in the lab, understanding of hygiene standards, standard operating procedures, contamination, biological hazards, vaccinations, those kind of things. And what precautions do you think should be taken to lessen the likelihood of infection or injury? So again, looking at things like health and safety, which you will have covered at university, hazards, SOPs, risk assessments, cost assessments, flammables, those kind of things, and your basic understanding of safe practice. And then we'll move on to competency and skills type questions. So many of you mentioned that you've already been involved in interviews that are competency based. So you might be asked to provide they might provide you with examples of abnormal results, which you might have to interpret. So it might be something like a set of full blood count results, for example, where you've got a low HB and a low MCV. So immediately we're looking for whether you're able to apply your knowledge to practice and diagnose that might be an iron deficiency anemia, for example. We might ask you to give an example of when you've had to follow a specific procedure. So again, that relates to things like SOPs. So we're looking at your ability to follow instructions, attention to detail, and understanding the importance of a consistent process. So why do you have to follow an SOP? What is the need for that when you're working in the lab? We might ask you to provide an example of where you've had an idea to improve a method or a process. So here we're looking at evidence of your proactivity, your engagement, logical thinking, and effective communication. Or give an example of when you've found time to provide customer service during a busy period. What were the circumstances? Who did it affect? What did you do personally? So here we're looking for evidence of customer service skills, your ability to prioritise, and your understanding of the impact of your actions. So I've just listed here a brief job description and person spec of an MLA, which is a medical laboratory assistant. So for this, the purpose of an MLA is to help in providing a high quality and efficient diagnostic service to patients and medical staff. So you'll be undertaking admin duties, you'll be involved in receiving samples and preparing those patient samples for processing. So you'll be expected to work effectively as a team member and provide a safe and well-maintained department. So if you go through this list and look at providing examples of how you meet this person specification, and then if you're in an interview and any of these, any questions come up that relate to these, you will already have some examples to provide. So the next slide is on an associate practitioner role. Sometimes we call these team members apps. So you might see someone referred to as an app, but that stands for associate practitioner. So I've highlighted in red where some of the things you might want to provide examples for before you've attended an interview. So if you do get asked questions, you can easily come up with these. So an app will have a similar responsibility to an MLA, but to a more higher level. They're expected to have experience, knowledge and skills in the main areas that I've listed on this slide. So think about, say, for example, in the physical skills, we're looking at good hand-eye coordination for handling delicate tools, microscope slides and small specimen types. So you might want to think about, if you've not already worked in the lab before, this is the first job that you're applying for in a lab setting, maybe think about some of the things that you've done at university. So have you been involved in making a blood film? Have you had to perform QC, for example, when you're using an analyzer where it involves electrophoresis, for example? There's a microscope where you've had to identify blood cells. So these are things where you will want to go back to your university modules and your practicals to check what things you can use as examples when answering questions. And back over to you, Jim. Thank you.
Thanks, Tahmina. So yeah, after the interview, or as you get towards the end of the interview, that's of course the point in time at which the panel will often say things like, do you have any questions for us? Is there anything you'd like to ask? Is there anything else you'd like to add to extend anything that you said already? And at this point, it's always good to ask a couple of questions, but just be careful what you do ask. This is the point where you're trying them on for size now. They've asked you the questions, you've nervously given answers that hopefully really show the best bits of your skills and attributes. So don't forget that the interview is a two-way process, that it is about you testing them as well. So as you're being asked these questions, as you're going through the interview, think about whether you could be managed by the person who's identified themselves as your boss. How have they responded to any questions that you've asked? If you're asking questions about the working pattern, or if it's come out during the discussion in the interview that they're changing a platform, if you've asked about how that will be implemented, what's the timescale for that implementation, those kind of things. How do they respond to any questions that you might ask? Are the responses short and clipped, or are they full responses that show that this person's taking you seriously? Do you see yourself working there in the short or the long term? And at the end of the interview, it's perfectly reasonable to ask questions that will allow you to address this point about how long you will see yourself working there for. So it might be that you ask questions about career progression. It might be that you ask questions about the size of the team, or a particular platform, or a particular process that you want to do more of, or that kind of thing. You might also ask questions about the broader site. So if you're new to the area, if you're new to the hospital, you might ask about certain on-site facilities. You might ask about access to a medical library or something like that. So just try and think about questions that you could ask that show that you are connected to the job, you're invested in the people, and you're invested in your future in that lab, because of course that builds the rapport on both sides of the table, and it shows that you're serious about the post. Try and ask questions that demonstrate insight and that show that you're driven and that you're ambitious. But try and avoid questions that focus on things like salary and annual leave, because at the minute, answers to questions like that are just not relevant. Questions like that are not relevant until they've rung and offered you the position. So talk about working patterns, talk about flexibility, ask questions about on-site facilities, local, gym discounts and that kind of thing. All those kind of things are relevant questions to ask. Try not to ask questions about pay and leave. And if you genuinely don't have any questions to ask, then it is okay to say that, particularly if during the course of the interview, all of those questions have been answered that you did have. In terms of questions, don't try and keep them all in your head. It's absolutely fine to take a notepad or a notebook or a piece of paper into the interview with you, with your questions written on in advance. Again, it demonstrates that you've planned things really well. It demonstrates that you've thought about the job that you want to do, and that you've prepared for that appropriately. I think all of the interviews that I've been in since I graduated, I've always had a notepad there. Sometimes I've even made notes during the interview to, as a question has come into my head during the interview, so that I don't forget to ask it at the end. If you've prepared properly, if you have managed to speak to members of the team or the lab manager or whoever, if you've done that due diligence, then it shouldn't be too hard to think of a question or two that you could ask. So it should be relatively easy to do that. Once you come out of the interview, it's really important that you don't just immediately switch off. After you come out of the interview, it's important to write down any immediate thoughts that you have. Is it a question that popped up as you were walking back to the station or the car that you just forgot to ask? Is there something that you've seen between leaving the interview and getting back to the car or onto the bus or whatever that you think you might need to follow up on? Maybe it's something you've seen on a poster on a notice board, or something that just happened as you were walking through reception or whatever. So write these things down so that if they ring you back to offer you the job, you've got that note and you can ask the question at that point. Try, and this is really hard, I'm terrible at doing this, try not to dissect your own performance. The interview is now done. You've done everything that you possibly can to try and convince that panel that you are the person for the job. If it's not enough, then we're past that point. So try not to dissect your performance, because there's nothing that you can change about it now. All you will do is just beat yourself up and make yourself feel bad about it. So try not to do it. Plus, it's human nature to always focus on what you forgot to say, what you forgot to ask, something that you just thought of that could answer a question better, those kind of things. So try not to do it, not helpful. However, do reflect on the experience. Did you come out feeling that you've done the best you can? The answer will be no, because it is for everybody. But did you come out thinking that you were authentically you? Did you let aspects of your personality shine through? If you have got a wickedly dry sense of humour, it's absolutely fine to let a little bit of that through in the interview that's appropriate to the position. Remember, the point of the interview is for the panel to see you, so you do need to be authentically you. Also, at this point, you should now have a better idea on whether you think you could work for these people, whether you think the commute that you took to get to the interview that morning is doable on a longer term. So as you're reflecting on the interview experience, think about what you're going to do if they offer you the job. If they offer you the job, are there any parameters that you cannot work outside of? So if they can't meet your requirements for flexible working, is that a deal breaker? Do you have an absolute minimum salary that you must have so that you can afford the rent, the mortgage, the fuel to commute to work every day, those kind of things? So think about what your parameters are and be realistic. If you have lots of experience, if you've got a huge breadth of skills that you've got available, then obviously your room for negotiation, if there is any negotiation to be had, is broader than if you are brand new into the role, into the sector, into the job discipline. But equally, don't let lack of experience make you rush decisions and just accept the first job that comes along. Ultimately, if the job is right for you and it fits well, then you will enjoy doing it, so you will get an awful lot more out of it. So think about what your parameters are. Think about what you might need to discuss with the employer, with the lab manager or HR or whoever it is that contacts you, to just make sure that the job is working for both of you. Remember, doing a job, the contract of employment between the employer and the employee, is a two-way street. So don't just feel as though you've got to accept whatever's offered. Have a discussion, ask the questions, because then you'll go into the whole job much more informed. And that's it from the formal presentation side of things. So we've got time left for questions. I don't know if Sue wants to jump in at this point to facilitate that.
Thanks, Jim. I will if my microphone's working now.
Yay.
Okay? Sometimes it turns it down like a Dalek and I don't know it's doing it, so please do tell me if it goes again. So I've been going through the question and answer box as we've been going along, and I've answered questions as they have popped up. So we had a specific question at the beginning about a band 6 post, the kind of things that people might ask for a band 6 post, so we can either deal with that now or we can speak to that particular participant later. And I said we can create frequently asked question answers if there are things that people would like us to create those resources for. So we haven't said yet, but we will follow up with an evaluation survey for you as well. to help inform how we do these sessions, if they've been useful, what you'd like us to do in the future. So if you could, when you give your answers, if you want to put anything in that you would like us to give you an answer to, we can create frequently asked questions from that. If it would be useful for you, for us to say, for an MLA position, you might be asked this kind of thing, it might look like that. For a band 5 position or a trainee position, it might look like this. For a band 6, it might look like that. We can't tell you everything they're going to ask. We don't know what all of the interview panels will ask, but we can certainly give you a bit of a framework so you know things that might be reasonable for them to ask and things to get ready for. And it might be depending on your specialism as well. So we could maybe give you some general pointers, and then for different specialisms we can follow up on that. So I just wanted to mention we have seen it, and I said we can either do it now or we can do it later. So we can see how we go with that one. And then we had lots of ones just around the questions that people might be asked. If I do contact the panel, what should I ask? So I said, well, you don't have to. If there's something that you do want to ask, then contact them. Don't feel you need to. You don't have to unless there's something relevant that you want to ask before you get to the interview date. It's not something you need to do. And then Yalman said, is it just me whose heart is beating fast now? When you said you want to show. So everybody's nervous. And I said that everybody is nervous when it's an interview. It doesn't matter who you are, how many you've had, you want to do it well. So because you want to do that interview well, everybody gets nervous. So the best thing you can do is run through it. Think of logical questions. So all the things that Tahmina and Jim have said. What are likely questions? Why do you want this job? Why do you want to work here? What kind of things are you bringing to it? What technical and practical skills do you have? What transferable skills do you have? All of those are going to be part of any interview you could possibly ever have, I think. It doesn't matter what the role is, they're very standard questions, aren't they? So even if you've just prepared some things for those, that's going to be really helpful to just calm you down. And they'll normally at the beginning of an interview do a bit of an icebreaker. If the panel are feeling nice, they'll do something that's, you know, not the first official question, but the first question in every interview I've ever had is, why do you want this job? Or why do you want this job now? That's what is most commonly asked first of all. So just have a little think about, you know, what would you say to that question? Not because it's just down the road and it's easy for me to get to, not because it's the first interview I've had, I just want a job, please. Think about an answer that shows that you're really interested in that post and that you've thought about it, like Jim said, done a bit of research, and you know it's a good fit for you. That's what they're looking for, that you've actually thought about it.
Just to extend that point, Sue, because I think that's really, really key as well. And one of the pitfalls in that first question of, you know, why this job, why now, or why here, why now, why you, or however the question is phrased, make sure that you bounce the answer back with something that you've seen from the job description that the employer wants. So I'd like this job because it allows me to reduce the commute so that I can look after the dog. But I've seen that you also need somebody that has knowledge of this platform, and I'm that person. And don't feel bad about saying things like, and I'm the person that can do that, because you're trying to establish that connection in their head. I have that skill set. I've got that experience. I've got this experience. It might sound really, really arrogant, but it isn't. It really isn't.
I was just going to say the same. That's the thing that a lot of us have to get over. We have to get over ourselves to give good answers at interviews, don't we? Because we're all quite self-conscious. Nobody likes to say, I'm amazing at what I do. That we find that very hard to say, don't we? Particularly as scientists, we're not very good at that. So remember, it's about fitting yourself to what they're looking for. But as Jim said, being yourself. So if there are particular things you know they're looking for, then you can say, I can do that thing. Here's the evidence I can do that thing. I do it well. The reason I know I do it well is because I've been told, I've done this qualification, I've got this certificate, I've got something where somebody said I'm really good at that thing. Whatever your evidence is, we quite often find it easy to say someone else told me I was good at it, rather than my opinion of myself is that I'm good at it. So think about ways that you can evidence that you are good at whatever it is they're asking. And then Blessing asked a question about lab tours. If you go on a lab tour, what things might be good to ask? So I said, again, a bit of background, looking at what that kind of lab is, what sort of techniques might they do, what kind of things would they be showing you. Think about them and just look them up before you go. So if you know the specialism, if it's haematology, clinical biochem, if it's a micro lab, just think about what they're likely to be showing you. Just go over your notes again about what those techniques might be, what they're looking for, how might they diagnose something, what's the process for that sample, and then you can ask those questions. Oh, okay, sample reception is here. Then you would take it to the next part, which is this. So it shows you've done a little bit of background and you've got some expertise in that as well.
That's one point where if it's not clear in the interview letter, you could actually establish contact with the panel before and say, I'm not clear whether a lab tour is part of this interview. If it's not, do you mind if I just come between now and the interview to have a look around? Again, it's showing that you're prepared to go out of your way for this job. And so it shows that you are keen, that you're enthusiastic, that you're invested in it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jim. And then we had a question about if you were looking for an M&A role, what kind of questions might you get asked, which Tahmina then went on to. But also the person who asked it said, if you've got no experience at all. Now, I would argue that everybody on this call has got experience. So to varying different degrees, but everybody's got experience. You've all interacted with others. You've all had to get up and go to somewhere in the morning. Good timekeeping, organising, prioritising things, you've all got those skills. So think about your transferable skills. And if you think, I've done my university study, but I haven't had a job, think about what have you learned in your university study. So what practical skills have you developed? What IT packages can you use? How have you worked with other people? How do you work with different people? All of those things are things that they will be asking you about. Okay, so don't ever go to an interview thinking, I don't have any experience. You do. It's about thinking about what experience you have. And that prep that we talked about, mapping yourself to the person spec and to the job role, that should give you hints and tips and sentences to say. So if they're looking for good communication, say so. If they're looking for organisation, give an example. So quite often in an interview, they will ask you about something with an example. So it might be, Jim, could you tell me, you said that you've got experience of organising meetings. Could you give me an example of when you've organised a meeting and how did you follow up to evaluate it worked? That's just a random example. So that's the kind of thing they could do. So they've looked at your CV, they've looked at what you said you can do. So they might ask you to demonstrate, to give an example of how you've done that. So have a few of those up your sleeve as well. And then someone has asked how long the interview would be. I would say in my experience, 45 minutes to an hour for most interviews, even if it doesn't matter what the role is, it's usually for them to get a good sense of you and for you to be able to ask questions. So normally 45 minutes, I would say, is the minimum. And then Sarah asked, are we going to post the session video? And I said, yeah, absolutely. It's been recorded and we'll send out a link for that. And then somebody who went to our original session and didn't get the recording, so we can follow up on that. That's not a problem at all. And I'm just going to go to the open questions. I think there's just a couple coming while I've been talking. So somebody's asked about band 5 questions. What might you be asked if you're going for a band 5 post? So we can pick that up now, or we can pick that up in the frequently asked questions. If we're being interviewed by different trusts within the same panel, is it appropriate to ask them all how their day-to-day operations are different trust to trust? Yeah, if you're going to be working across trusts, I would think that would be a sensible thing to ask. And then what do they expect you to say when they say introduce yourself? That's a great question.
That is, but this is one, Richmond, where you could pick up on everything that Sue's just said. So for example, if I was asked that question in an interview, I would start with something like, hi, my name's Jim Taylor. I've worked in the field of education across a range of levels for about 20 years, and I'm interested in this role because I've got 20 years experience of digital pedagogy, and I think that you need that skill set. Bang.
Yeah.
You've introduced yourself and you've put front and center stage what it is that you're badging yourself on, what you see as your unique selling point.
And the reason that you can do that, Jim, is that you and I have done lots of practice interviews.
Yes, that is true. That is true. We've done a lot of practice.
Oh my word, I'm never going to be able to do that.
Yeah. You will be able to do it. You will be able to do it. Identify what your USP is and you will be able to do it. And just a little bit of hubris to just push you over the line.
Yeah, and write it down. You know, when you're saying take notes in, have questions ready, that kind of thing. Write it down and just look over it on the way, on your journey to the interview. Just have a look and see what it was you were going to say, and some of it will stick. And in that interview situation, you'll be able to say it. So in my experience, when people are interviewed, they either say nothing because they clam up, or they say a lot because they're nervous. So if you think about how you are in that kind of situation and how you might answer the questions, having a few of them thought out in advance is quite good. Tahmina, did you want to come in? I know we're up to time, aren't we?
Yeah. I just wanted to say one last thing really before we sign off, is that if you've attended an interview and you haven't been successful, make sure you do ask for feedback from the employer, but also don't just ask for feedback and do nothing with it. Work on that feedback, make sure you take it on board, look at the things that they've identified for improvement, areas for development, those kind of things, and work on those for your next interview. The more you do, the better you'll get. It's just practice and confidence.
It is. It is, and it's quite often useful to have an interview for something that you're not as bothered about before you have the one that you are really, really interested in, isn't it? Just to get that practice in. But you can do it at uni. Everyone, if you're still at university, you will have a careers service. A lot of them will offer interview practice and help you with CVs, that kind of thing. So make use of the resources around you, or use your friends. Just do a practice one. You can't replicate the nerves, but you can certainly replicate your answers and get all your ums and ers and ahs out of the way before you get into the room. That's quite a good thing to do.
That I think is another reason why focusing on a little bit of post-interview evaluation of your own performance is good. So I got feedback that my answers were way too long, and that, when I reflected on it, was because I was so nervous, because I really wanted the job. But what that meant was the next interview you went for, you go in aware of the fact that when, I now know when I'm nervous, I tend to ramble a little bit. So just rein it in a little bit, Jim, and say a little bit less, because less is more.
Okay, so I can see there's a few more questions coming in. We'll answer those in the questions and answer, and we'll roll that into the information that comes out after the session. So I am aware it's a couple of minutes after 1, so thank you so much to everyone for joining us. I hope you found it useful. We will disseminate the recording. We'll follow up if anyone did come to the last IBMS Support Hub and hasn't got access to that. We'll follow up where that is and let you know. The resources will be out. We'll use the evaluation questionnaire that we're going to send you as well to help inform the future sessions, but we do have them planned for every month for the rest of the year, apart from September when we've got Congress. So if anybody wants to join the ones that are coming up, we'll try and get those details out on social media so that you can see when they are and you can plan them in your diary. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm really sorry about my microphone issues earlier, but Jim and Tahmina did a brilliant job of hosting. So thank you, everybody. Take care, and hope to see you at the next one.